The vote was already done before anyone bothered to pretend it wasn't. I had been sitting in that chamber for 11 years, 700 delegates from 41 species, and not one of them had ever voted yes on anything humanity actually needed. They voted yes on symbolic gestures. They voted yes on resolutions that cost them nothing. But the things that mattered, the actual, structural, consequential things, went red on that board like clockwork. 31 lights, red, one at a time. I counted them. The Velhari archspeaker was 4 meters of luminescent contempt wrapped in robes that cost more than the annual output of a mid-sized lunar colony. His name was Saraval, and he had a sound his species made when something small did something he already expected. He made that sound now. It was a low, wet resonance that his translator rendered as nothing, because it was not meant for translation. It was just the sound of a man who had never been surprised and intended to keep it that way. I had heard that sound in this room for 11 years. I set my earpiece on the stone dais. Not hard, not dramatically. I set it down the way you set down a book you have finished reading, with that particular kind of quiet that comes after the last page. The earpiece was 11 grams. I knew because I had weighed it once, on a day I was feeling very precise about small, manageable things. Nobody spoke. 700 delegates, and not one of them said a word. I stood up. I pushed my chair back. The chair was built for Velhari proportions and had always been slightly too tall for me, so for 11 years I had sat in it with my feet not quite flat on the floor. For 11 years I had sat in that chair and reached for that earpiece and spoken through that translation buffer, and I had been polite and measured and diplomatic and patient, and it had earned humanity exactly 31 red lights. I walked toward the door. My aide, Owen, came after me at a half-jog. He was 26 years old and had never seen me do anything that was not in a briefing document. I heard his footsteps behind me, and I held up 2 fingers without turning around. Wait. The door was a sliding panel of council-grade material that cost about as much as a small warship. It opened at my approach. It sealed behind me with a sound like a held breath finally released. The corridor outside was empty. Pale stone walls, that particular shade of institutional gray that the council used everywhere, the color of something that had never been alive. Owen came through 10 seconds later. He was trying very hard to look calm and failing in the specific way that young people fail when they are performing calm. Slightly too still, slightly too controlled, like a person holding a container they are afraid to spill. He said, "Ambassador Voss, what just happened?" I thought about how to answer that. 11 years, 43 votes, every single one of them the same. Humanity had come to the Galactic Council in good faith. We had filed proposals in triplicate. We had sat in chairs built for other species. We had spoken through translation buffers that shaved the edges off everything we said, turning our language into something smoother and less honest than what we meant. We had been diplomatic. We had been patient. We had been, if I was being precise about it, very, very good at sitting in rooms where we were not wanted and pretending that we were. What had happened was that I ran out of patience. I did not say that. I put my earpiece down, I said. Owen stared at me. "Is this a tactic?" he asked. I looked at the sealed door. Behind it, 700 delegates were doing what delegates do when something unexpected happens. They were talking about procedure. They were referencing precedent. They were checking whether there was a formal protocol for what I had just done. There was not, because no one had ever done it before. "No," I said. Owen waited for me to say what it was instead. I did not. I started walking down the corridor. My heels made a sound against the stone floor that I had always liked, clean and deliberate, the sound of a person going somewhere on purpose. Owen fell in beside me, his tablet already open, his fingers moving over it with the desperate efficiency of a man who needed data to make sense of a situation that data could not explain. "The council secretary will want a statement," he said. The council secretary will want a lot of things. What do I tell him? Tell him Ambassador Voss has concluded her participation in this session. That is not, they will want clarification. I know. We walked the length of the corridor. It was a long corridor. The council had built everything at a scale designed to make individuals feel small, and for most species it worked. For humans, it mostly just made the walk longer. The proposal is dead, Owen said. He meant Proposal 7G, he meant the Terraforming Sovereignty Act. He meant the thing we had spent 14 months preparing, the thing that was, by any reasonable measure, a completely sensible request that hurt no one and helped humanity manage its own space, without asking permission from a committee that had never once demonstrated it had our interests in mind. Yes, I said. What do we do now? The end of the corridor opened into an atrium. High ceilings, more pale stone, a window that looked out at the planet's surface, a world that was not Earth, under a sun that was not ours, filtered through glass that tinted everything a shade slightly off from natural light. I stopped at the window. Below, transport craft were moving across the landing field in the slow, bureaucratic patterns that the council scheduling office enforced even on ships that could have moved 3 times as fast. Everything on this world moved at the council's pace. Everything adapted to the council's structure, the council's preferences, the council's timeline. I had a grandmother who said the most dangerous thing a woman can do is leave a room quietly. She was right. We go home, I said. Owen's tablet made a sound. He looked at it, he looked at me. The Velhari Archspeaker is requesting an emergency mediation slot. Archive it. Ambassador. Archive it, Owen, please. He archived it. We walked to the transport bay. I did not look back at the chamber doors. I did not slow down. I did not make any statement to the 3 council press entities that had already positioned themselves at the bay entrance, holding recording devices and looking hopeful. I got on the transport. Behind me, the council chamber was full of people deciding what humanity's quiet exit meant. They were consulting scholars. They were drafting memos. They were almost certainly reaching the conclusion that we would be back within the week, chastened and apologetic, ready to try again. I had been very careful, over 11 years, not to give the council any reason to expect what I was actually like. The transport lifted. The council's world fell away below us, pale stone and long corridors and rooms built for species that were not mine, and I sat in my seat with my hands folded in my lap, and I felt something that I did not have a word for and did not try to name. The earpiece was still on the dais. 11 grams. I had left it there on purpose. Owen opened his tablet again. He was making lists. He was a good aide. Owen, steady, meticulous, built for the kind of work that required you to function normally when the situation was not normal at all. I watched him work, and I thought about the 14 months we had spent preparing Proposal 7G, and the 9 times before that we had prepared other proposals, and the 31 red lights that were waiting at the end of every single one of them. My grandmother also said, "The room notices when you stop trying to fill it." She was talking about something else entirely. It applied anyway. The stars came into view as we cleared the atmosphere, cold and fixed and indifferent, and I looked at them the way I had been looking at them since I was 7 years old. Like they were mine, like we were already on our way to them, like no committee in any chamber on any world had ever had anything to say about that. They had not. They still did not. I closed my eyes. Behind me, 41 species were deciding what to make of an empty chair and an 11-gram earpiece on a stone dais. They would figure it out. I gave them 6 weeks. The first transmission arrived 11 days after I left. I read it on a Tuesday morning in the UNSC briefing room on floor 4 of the Geneva Annex, where the coffee was terrible and the lighting made everyone look like they had not slept, which was usually accurate. The transmission was from the council secretary's office, and it used the word imperative 4 times in 11 sentences, which told me everything I needed to know about how the meeting it was requesting was going to go. I archived it. Owen was watching me from across the table. He had that look he got when he was deciding whether to say something. He decided. "That is the third one," he said. "I know. The Velhari delegation has also filed 2 formal requests for dialogue." "I know. And the Surath." "The what?" Owen checked his tablet. "The Surath Confederation, small species, border systems along Rim 7, low council status, mostly flagged under non-council entities, standard low-priority routing. They sent a transmission 8 days ago." He paused. "It got filed in the archive automatically. I only caught it this morning when I was clearing the queue." He turned the tablet around and slid it across the table to me. The transmission was 40 seconds long. A woman, small, older, with the careful posture of someone who had learned to take up as little space as possible in rooms that were not built for her, speaking in her own language, no translation matrix attached. She trusted us to figure it out. "We had," the message said. "We did not know assistance could be given without permission from the council. We did not know you were permitted to simply help. 16 days ago, your survey vessels arrived at our eastern border system. They did not ask for documentation. They did not file routing requests. They assessed the geological instability in Surath 9, and they gave us their findings and they left. We have been trying to understand what this means." She paused. The 40 seconds were almost up. "We think it means you are kind," she said. "We wanted someone to know." I sat with that for a while. The survey team on Surath 9, I pulled the records. 6 geologists, a standard survey vessel, a 3-day assessment. No council routing because there was no longer a council routing office that humanity was filing with. They had gone because the instability data had flagged a risk to inhabited settlements, and they had gone because they could, and because nobody had told them not to. They had not reported back with a form. They had just gone. Owen was still watching me. "Did you know about this?" I asked. "Not until this morning." "How many other messages like this are in the low-priority archive?" He looked at his tablet. He looked at it for a long time. "I am going to need a few hours to go through it," he said. "Go through it." I stood up and walked to the window. Geneva in the morning was gray and green and calm, the lake catching the early light, the mountains somewhere behind the cloud cover. Earth, my Earth, the planet we had been asking a committee's permission to expand beyond for 11 years. The Surath woman had said we were kind. I thought about that. I thought about the instability in Surath 9, and the settlements built in its shadow, and the 6 geologists who had gone without asking, and the 40-second message filed under low-priority routing, and the 43 council votes, read and precise as a sentence being read to a person who already knew what it said. I took out a piece of paper. Owen came back into the room 20 minutes later and stopped in the doorway. "Are you writing by hand?" "Yes." "Why?" "So she knows a person wrote it." He was quiet for a moment. Then he sat down and went back to his tablet and did not ask any more questions about it, which was one of the things I valued most about Owen. I wrote a reply to the Surath elder. Her name was Myra. I wrote it in English, plain and clear, without diplomatic language or formal headers or the careful smoothed-down phrasing that translation buffers preferred. I wrote it the way my grandmother would have written a letter, direct and warm, the way people used to write when a letter cost something to send. Then I handed it to the translator. Then I went back to the window. The council's trade route analyst, a young woman named Claire who worked out of the Brussels monitoring office, sent her report to my desk at 3 in the afternoon. She had been tracking human commercial and survey movements for 6 weeks, and her report was, in her own words in the cover note, not what she expected to find. Human corridors were busy. They had not slowed down, they had not contracted, they had simply moved, like water, Claire wrote, like something looking for ground. I pulled up the route map she had attached. Humanity had, in the 6 weeks since I walked out of the council chamber, signed quiet bilateral resource agreements with 12 species that the council classified as peripheral. We had continued terraforming operations in Kepler's corridor without filing pre-approval requests, because there was no longer anyone we were asking. We had sent survey teams to 4 border system locations flagged for geological instability, because the data existed and the teams existed, and nothing existed anymore to stop us from simply acting on both. We had not blocked a single council route. We had not refused a single communication. We had not, technically, done anything that could be classified as hostile. We had just stopped waiting. Owen came in at 4 with a list. It was 2 pages long. Non-council species who had received some form of unprompted human assistance in the 6 weeks since the walkout, survey data, agricultural consultation, medical supply routing through human commercial networks, a navigation hazard assessment for the shipping lanes near a species called the Veth, who had not even known such assessments were possible. None of it had been filed with the council. None of it had needed to be. There are 41 entries on this list, Owen said. I know. In 6 weeks. I know. He put the list down, he looked at it, he looked at me. Were you expecting this? He asked. I thought about the 9 proposals, the 31 red lights, the 11 years of sitting in a chair that was too tall for me and reaching for an earpiece and speaking through a buffer that shaved the edges off everything we said. No, I said, but I was not surprised by it either. He nodded slowly. The council secretary has sent a 5th transmission, he said. This one uses the word crisis. Archive it. In the council chamber, Saraval was reviewing the trade route maps that his intelligence office had compiled. He was a careful man, thorough in the way that powerful people sometimes are when they have never had reason to be anything else. He looked at the routes for a long time. He made his species sound for inconvenience, a low, compressed tone that his translator did not render because it was not meant for external audiences. Then he scheduled a task force. The task force had 14 members, a 90-day evaluation timeline, and a mandate to assess the implications of human disengagement from standard council frameworks. 90 days. He filed the scheduling form and moved to the next item on his agenda. Myra's reply came back 3 days after I sent my letter. It was 2 sentences. We have shared your message with the full Surath Council. We did not know until now that we had been seen. I read it twice. I read it at my desk at 7 in the morning with the coffee that Owen made, which was better than the Geneva Annex coffee, and I sat with those 2 sentences for a while and thought about what it cost to spend a long time not being seen. I did not share the message with the press office. I did not include it in the weekly briefing document. I filed it in my personal correspondence folder, where I kept the things that were too important to lose in bureaucratic routing and too private to turn into policy. Then I got up and went back to work. The bilateral agreements needed follow-up documentation. The Kepler's corridor teams needed updated geological reports. There were 41 entries on Owen's list, and most of them needed some form of continued engagement, and there was no council framework to do any of it through, which meant we were building the framework as we went. It was messier than filing forms in triplicate. It was also faster. It was also, and this was the part I kept returning to, the part that sat in the back of my mind at odd hours, during transit, during briefings, during the moments between one task and the next. It felt like the thing we had been trying to do all along, except without the waiting. 11 years of waiting. 6 weeks of not waiting. 41 entries on a list. One message filed under low-priority routing from a woman who wanted someone to know. Owen knocked on the open door. Claire from Brussels is on the line. She says the route map has updated and she wants to walk you through the new patterns. Put her through. He paused. She also says, and I am quoting, that the numbers are doing something she does not have a precedent for, and she has been doing this for 12 years. I picked up the line. Outside, the mountains had come out from behind the cloud cover. Snow on the peaks, clean and precise, the kind of detail that exists whether or not anyone is in the room to see it. 41 entries. In 6 weeks. Without a single permission form. Claire, I said, tell me what you are seeing. The Creth data packet arrived on a Thursday. I was in the middle of a resource agreement review with a species called the Navar when Owen came in and set the packet drive on the desk beside my coffee and left without saying anything. That was how I knew it was serious. Owen said things. Owen narrated the day as it happened, a running commentary of tasks and schedules and incoming requests, because that was how he processed information, and I had stopped asking him to be quieter about it years ago. When Owen was silent, the thing in front of him had no words that fit. I finished the Navar review. I thanked their delegate, a patient woman named Sola who had flown 16 hours for a meeting that ran 40 minutes, and I walked her out and I came back and I sat down and I picked up the data packet drive. I read it once. Then I set it down. Well, I said to the empty room, now. I sat with that for a moment. Then I picked it up and read it again. The Creth were not an enemy in any way I had been trained to understand enemies. They were not a species with territory to defend or resources to take. They were not governed by fear or ambition or the ordinary pressures that made living things do the things living things did. They were a pattern, a vast distributed intelligence that moved through inhabited systems the way a tide moved through a coastline, not because it meant to, not because it wanted to, but because that was what it did. And what it did specifically was consume military engagement models. Every species that had sent a fleet against them had watched that fleet become a lesson. The Creth did not fight. They learned. They absorbed every doctrine, every formation, every tactical decision, and they rooted around it the next time with complete precision. The Velhari's 7 foundational engagement models, the strategic framework they had developed over 400 years of conflict management. The Creth had processed all 7 after 2 engagements. The 3rd engagement had not gone well. I thought about what it meant to fight something that learned from being fought. I thought about what kind of species would be genuinely hard to learn from. I thought about the proposal 7G vote, about the 31 red lights, about every strategic briefing I had ever sat through where the Council's military advisors had praised the predictability of their own doctrine as a virtue. Predictable. I thought about that word for a long time. My second in command was a man named Alan Webb. He had been military before he was diplomatic, 12 years in the UNSC Rapid Assessment Division, 3 combat deployments, the kind of service record that made him very good at walking into a room and immediately identifying where the exits were. He came in at 7 the next morning, read the packet in 12 minutes and said, "They need us because we are unpredictable." "They need us because we are chaotic," I said. He looked at me. "That is the same thing." "No," I said. "Unpredictable means they cannot guess what we will do. Chaotic means we cannot guess what we will do. The Creth cannot consume a doctrine that does not exist yet." Alan was quiet. He had the particular stillness of a person fitting a new piece into a picture that had just changed shape. "Human forces," he said. "Human forces. Under what command structure?" "That is what we are going to negotiate." He looked at his copy of the packet. The Council is going to want integrated command, joint structure, Velhari tactical authority. Yes. You are not going to give them that. No. He almost smiled. Alan almost smiled the way some people almost sneezed. There was a whole architecture of expression that built up and then stopped just short of completing itself. Who do you want to send to Titan? He asked. I had been thinking about this since Thursday. Colonel O, I said. Alan nodded. Yi-1, good choice. He will absolutely eat in front of them. That is part of the choice. Titan Station was humanity's outer system coordination hub, a structure that had started as a fuel depot and expanded, over 60 years, into something that looked less like a station and more like a permanent argument in favor of human improvisation. It was functional in the way that a tool that has been repaired 17 times is functional, fully capable, slightly eccentric, extremely difficult to replicate. Colonel Yi-1-0 had been stationed there for 3 years. He was 41 years old, South Korean by heritage, California by upbringing, and had the kind of temperament that made him genuinely difficult to unsettle. He was not calm in the way that trained diplomats were calm, as a performance of control. He was calm in the way that certain landscapes were calm. It was simply his natural state, and things that landed on it tended to slide off without leaving a mark. The Council's envoy was Saraval. I found out later, Owen pulled the confirmation records, that Saraval had prepared a formal presentation for the meeting, 12 slides, a holographic display of Kreth engagement data, a proposed integration framework with 6 structural provisions. He arrived at the Titan conference room on time, which was a council virtue. Yi-1-0 was already there. He was eating a pork belly sandwich from the food truck that docked at Titan Station every Tuesday. The bread was the kind you could only get from one specific vendor in the lower bay, and O had been getting it every Tuesday for 3 years, and he saw no reason the arrival of a council archdiplomat should change that. He did not stand up. He said, "You want something to eat." Saraval's translator rendered this as a formal greeting variation, and Saraval responded with the appropriate diplomatic acknowledgement, which meant he had entirely missed what had just happened. He would understand it later, not then. He launched into his presentation. O listened. He ate his sandwich with the full attention of a man for whom this meal was genuinely the most interesting thing in the room, which was both entirely genuine and deeply strategic. He finished the sandwich. He set the wrapper on the table and folded it with the precise focus of a person completing a task that deserved to be completed properly. Saraval finished his framework proposal, 6 provisions, joint command, Velhari tactical authority, human forces as a supplementary element within existing strategic doctrine. O said no. Saraval outlined the magnitude of the Kreth threat. 3 rim systems consumed. Velhari fleet reduced by 30% after 2 engagements. Projected expansion rate that put inhabited core systems at risk within 18 months. O said, I understand. Saraval said, then you understand the urgency of cooperation. O said, yes, he paused. Still no, but I will tell you what I will do. He had not opened a presentation. He had not brought a tablet. He reached across the table and turned Saraval's holographic display to face him, and he began talking. I got the report from O at 11 that night, sitting in the Geneva Annex with cold coffee and a window full of dark mountains. The report was 4 lines long. Meeting went fine, told them what we would do and what we would not. They do not love it, they will take it. Finishing the sandwich first was Alan's idea for the record. You owe him lunch. I put the report down. The Kreth packet was still on my desk. I had read it 4 times now. Each time I came back to the same section, the part where the Council's military analysts described their own strategic doctrine as the most sophisticated engagement framework in the known galaxy. Sophisticated, consistent, thoroughly documented. The Krath had consumed it in 2 engagements. I thought about what we were, not what the Council had spent 11 years categorizing us as, not the liability, not the anomaly, not the species too fractious and disorganized for proper integration into galactic governance. I thought about what we actually were. We were a species that had never, in our entire history, managed to agree on a single unified way to do anything. We fought each other constantly about methods and priorities, and who was in charge of what. Our military history was 1,000 years of improvisation, of plans falling apart and new plans being made in the moment, of individual soldiers making decisions that no strategic doctrine had anticipated. The Kreth consumed patterns. We barely had patterns. That was not a liability. That was the thing. I had known it in some way. Since Thursday, since I set the packet drive down and said, well, now to an empty room, but sitting with it at 11 at night, with cold coffee and dark mountains and O's 4-line report on my screen, it landed differently. The thing they had spent 11 years calling our weakness. The thing they needed. I did not feel triumphant about that. I thought I might, at some point over those 11 years. I thought that if the moment ever came when the Council needed what they had dismissed, I would feel something clean and complete, some version of satisfaction that made the 11 years worth something. What I actually felt was tired in a different way than I had been tired before, not the tired of waiting, something else. Something that was less like exhaustion and more like the particular weight of being right about something you had really hoped you were wrong about. I closed the packet. I pulled up the Surath route update. 41 entries had become 53. I started reading. The council chamber had the same ceiling it always had. A quarter-mile up, vaulted and pale and designed to make every individual inside it feel appropriately small. I had spent 11 years looking at that ceiling and feeling exactly what it was designed to make me feel. I sat down. My earpiece was already in my ear. I had put it there in the transport before we docked, before we cleared security, before I walked through those particular doors again for the first time in 4 months. I put it in my own ear with my own hand, and that was different from the way I used to put it in, which was the whole point. Owen was beside me. Alan was 1 row back. Behind them, the full human delegation of 14 people, the largest we had ever brought to a council session, because this was not a routine session, and we were done conducting significant events with minimal staff to keep the appearance of deference. Saraval was in his seat across the chamber floor. He looked at me when I came in. I looked back at him. Neither of us nodded. The council secretary called the session to order. Alan read the terms. Not me, Alan, the man with the military record and the quiet exits and the almost smile, reading in the clear, undecorated voice he used for reports and assessments. Not diplomatic cadence, not the rounded-off, translated smooth register that council sessions usually ran in. Plain language. English, run through the translation buffer but not softened by it. The terms were 14 pages long. Humanity had time. The first 4 pages were structural. Framework agreements for bilateral engagement with non-council species, resource corridor documentation protocols, terraforming sovereignty provisions for uninhabited systems within expansion corridors. Things we had been asking for through 9 proposals over 11 years, now stated not as requests but as terms. The room was very attentive. The next 6 pages were operational. Joint engagement protocols for the Kreth response, human force parameters and command independence, a clear boundary on integration that gave the Council what it needed, our participation, without giving it what it wanted, which was our compliance. Saraval objected to 3 clauses in page 7. I let him finish. I timed it 40 seconds. Then I said, bless your heart, those are not the ones to object to. His translator rendered it as a diplomatic acknowledgement. He moved on. He would understand it eventually. They always did. The remaining 4 pages were the ones the room was not expecting. Alan turned to page 11. He said, Term 1. Effective upon ratification of this agreement, full council recognition, provisional protectorate status, and permanent diplomatic seat, Surath Confederation. The room was very still. Not the performed stillness of delegates waiting for the next agenda item. The actual stillness of a large number of people recalculating something at the same time. I had been in rooms where that happened before. There was a particular quality to it, a silence that was not empty but dense, full of the sound of assumptions being revised. In the observer gallery, 3rd row from the front, Myra sat in the seat that the Surath delegation had been allocated. Observer status. Non-voting. Present only because I had personally filed the attendance request 3 days ago and listed it under a provision so procedurally minor that no one had flagged it for review. She had come from 16 hours away. She was wearing formal Surath dress, deep gray, precise in its simplicity, the kind of clothing that said, I know what this occasion is. When Alan read Term 1, she made a sound. I heard it from across the chamber. 40 feet of stone floor and 700 bodies and the ambient hum of translation equipment, and I heard it, not loud, not staged, the sound of something that had been held for a long time releasing without warning. Her translator would not have caught it. It was not meant for translation. I looked at the ceiling. 1/4 mile up, pale stone, designed for weight. It did not feel as heavy as it used to. The session ran for 4 hours. The objections came in waves. The Velhari bloc objected to the command independence provisions. The Terath Collective had concerns about corridor documentation that were actually concerns about precedent, because if humanity could operate bilaterally, then so could everyone, and that was a larger structural disruption than the Terath preferred to contemplate. The Mevan delegation was quiet throughout, which I had learned over 11 years meant they were doing math and would ask questions at the end that were more pointed than anyone expected. I answered everything directly. Not warmly, not apologetically, directly, because these were terms, not proposals, and the language of terms was different from the language of proposals. Proposals said, we would like to. Terms said, here is what we are doing. The distinction was significant, and I was not pretending it was not. Owen passed me a note at the 2-hour mark. It said, Saraval has not objected since page 7. I glanced across the chamber. Saraval was reading page 13. His expression was the one I had seen him use when he was processing something that did not fit his existing model, not hostile, not defensive. Careful, the expression of a man who was genuinely thinking. I had not expected to respect him in that moment. I did a little. The vote on Term 1, the Surath provision, came at hour 3. I had not been certain it would pass. I had run the numbers with Owen the night before, and the numbers said, possible but not guaranteed. The council's instinct ran toward consolidation. Expanding the voting block meant expanding the number of variables, and the council ran on the premise that fewer variables meant better governance. What the council was slowly understanding, and what the 53 entries on Owen's list and the Kreth data packet and 4 months of human bilateral activity had been demonstrating in real time, was that variables did not go away when you refused to count them. They just moved somewhere you were not watching. The vote ran. 21 yes, 8 no, 6 abstentions. The Surath Confederation would hold a permanent diplomatic seat. In the observer gallery, Myra sat very still. Then she took a breath that I could see from 40 feet away, the breath of a person who had been bracing for a long time and was now, slowly, allowing herself to stop. I thought about 43 seconds in a low-priority inbox queue. I thought about that more than I meant to. The full agreement passed at hour 4. Not unanimously. The vote was 26 to 12 with 3 abstentions. not a resounding endorsement, not a victory celebration. The kind of vote that happened when a room had looked at the alternative and decided this was preferable. That was fine. I had not come for a celebration. Alan gathered the documents. Owen packed the briefing materials. The human delegation moved toward the exit in the calm, methodical way that people moved when they had done what they came to do and were ready to go home. Serval crossed the chamber floor. He did not hurry. He moved at the pace of a man who had made a decision about something and was carrying it deliberately, the way you carry something you are not entirely certain of yet. He stopped beside me. "Ambassador Voss," he said. His translator gave it the formal register. "Archspeaker," I said. He was quiet for a moment. He looked at the terms document in Alan's hands. He looked at the chamber which was emptying around us. He said, "You were prepared for this outcome." I thought about the right answer. "No," I said, "we were prepared for all of them." He processed that. Something in his expression shifted, not the recalculating look from earlier, something adjacent to it. The look of a person who had just understood something they had been missing for a long time. He inclined his head. It was not a bow. It was not an apology. It was the particular acknowledgement of one professional to another, across a distance that had not closed and was not pretending to have closed. I inclined mine. He walked away. Owen was at my elbow. "Transport is ready." 1 minute. I looked at the dais, the stone surface, the place where an 11-gram earpiece had sat for approximately 40 minutes 4 months ago, before someone from housekeeping had, presumably, placed it in lost and found or disposed of it according to council facility protocol. The place was just stone now, pale and indifferent. I had not planned to look at it. I found I was anyway. Myra appeared at my left. She moved quietly, the way people moved when they had spent a long time in rooms that did not build seats for them. "Ambassador," she said. "Myra." She looked at me with the careful, direct expression I had come to recognize from her transmissions, the expression of a person who said exactly what she meant and meant exactly what she said. "This seat at the council, we did not ask for it." "I know. Why did you put it in the terms?" I thought about the right way to answer that. The diplomatic answer, the policy answer, the answer that framed it as strategic positioning or precedent setting or the logical extension of the bilateral engagement framework. I said, because 43 seconds is too long for a message like yours to sit in a low-priority queue. She did not respond immediately. She looked at me. Then she said, "I would like to understand your people better." "We are very confusing," I said. "Fair warning." Something moved across her face, something that, on a human face, I would have called the beginning of a smile. "Yes," she said, "we noticed." She walked toward the gallery exit. I watched her go. Owen said again, "Transport is ready." "Coming," I said. I did not look at the dais again. 1 year. The chair was the wrong shade of blue. Not dramatically wrong. Not something anyone else in the room would notice or care about. It was simply that the council fabricators had built it to human proportions, and they had done a reasonable job of that part. But the color, which had been specified as a medium, neutral blue in the original design request, had come out somewhere between institutional gray and the particular blue of something that had never quite committed to being either. I sat down in it anyway. The ceiling was still a quarter-mile up. Some things were consistent. The chamber had been arranged differently for the integration ceremony. More seating for observers. Delegations from 37 species, including 8 that had not attended a full session in over a decade. The Surath delegation, not observer status, not flagged as low priority, was seated at the main floor level for the first time in the Confederation's existence. Myra was in the front row. She was wearing the same deep gray she had worn 4 months ago in the observer gallery. I had the impression she wore it when things mattered. Around her, the full Sureth diplomatic team, 4 people, which was small by council standards, sat with the careful, composed attention of people who understood exactly where they were and what it had taken to get there. I had not told her I was glad she was there. I was, though. The ceremony itself was, by council tradition, elaborate. The formal readings, the procedural declarations, the sequential acknowledgement of each voting member's ratification. The council secretary had a gift for making significant things feel like form-filling, which was either a tremendous talent or a significant flaw, depending on what you were hopping a moment would be. I sat through it with the practiced patience of someone who had spent 11 years in rooms like this and had learned, somewhere around year 3, that the ceremony was not the point. The ceremony was the packaging. What mattered was what had already been decided, what was already in motion, what was already written into agreements that would outlast this room and everyone in it. Alan was behind me. Owen to my right, tablet open, tracking the session timeline with the focus of a man who found order genuinely comforting. I sat and I looked at the ceiling. Before the final gavel, during the procedural pause that the council used for documentation signing, Myra appeared at my shoulder. She moved quietly. She had a talent for arriving without announcement that I suspected was less a skill and more a lifelong habit formed in rooms that did not expect her to be in them. "Ambassador Voss," she said, "I have a question." "Of course." She was quiet for a moment in the way that people were quiet when they had been thinking about something for a while and were deciding how to ask it. Then, "This phrase you use, bless your heart, I heard it in the session 4 months ago. I want to understand it precisely." I looked at her. I thought about how to explain it. The honest explanation required some context about a very particular kind of Southern American social interaction, about the specific social armor of a culture that developed the phrase as a way to say one thing while meaning another, while making the recipient aware of both levels simultaneously. It required explaining irony as a form of warmth and distance at the same time. I thought about Saraval's objection on page 7. I thought about the 40 seconds I had given him. I thought about the way I had said it, which was not cruel. I had been very careful that it was not cruel, but which was also not soft. "It means I see you very clearly," I said, "and I am choosing not to say what I am thinking." Myra considered this. "And when do you say it warmly?" she asked. "When you mean both things at once." She was quiet again. Then she said, "I think I have been saying a version of this my entire life in Sureth. I did not know other languages had it." "Most languages have something like it," I said. "The ones where people have had to be careful for a long time." She looked at me with that direct, careful expression. "Yes," she said, "that is exactly it." The council secretary called the session back to order. The final gavel came down at 14:47 Council Standard Time. The room responded in the various ways that 37 species expressed collective acknowledgement, which was a genuinely interesting sound. Not unified, not harmonized, each species' version of approval layered on the others in a complex and unplanned chord. I sat in the wrong shade of blue chair and looked at the ceiling and thought, very precisely, nothing for approximately 4 seconds. Then I reached into my jacket, took out my earpiece and put it in my ear. My own hand. My own choice. Same 11 grams. I did not weigh it again, I knew. Owen appeared beside me before I had fully processed that the session was over. He had his tablet, because Owen always had his tablet, and his expression had the specific quality that it got when he was carrying information that he was not sure how to frame. "Message from Colonel O," he said. He handed me the tablet. The message had been sent from somewhere on the galactic rim. The header said the location was a mobile command unit. O had not specified which one, because O considered most administrative details to be optional embellishments. The message said, "Same time next apocalypse." There was a second line. Also, the Kreth front is holding at the third boundary. Not winning. Winning looks different. 3 species evacuated clean. Navar got their whole orbital infrastructure out. Tell the Sureth lady hi from the sandwich guy. I read it twice. Owen was watching me with the expression he reserved for situations where he thought he might be witnessing something significant and was not certain whether to say something about it. "Tell him hi back," I said. "From who?" "From the earpiece lady." Owen made a note. He was one of the few people on Earth who could make a note without expressing any visible opinion about its contents, which was a talent I had come to rely on. The evacuation data from the rim systems came in the next morning. O's message had said 3 species, and the data confirmed it: the Navar, the Velsureth Border Collective, and a small, previously uncatalogued group called the ETH, who had been living in a system that the Council's survey records had classified as uninhabited because the Council's survey records had been compiled 60 years ago and nobody had gone back to check. O's team had found them while plotting evacuation corridors. They had rerouted the corridor. They had pulled the ETH out with 30 hours to spare before the Kreth tide reached that system. 30 hours. The corridor reroute had not been in the plan. It had not been in the doctrine. O had looked at the data, found the people, and changed the plan, because the plan was supposed to serve the outcome, and the outcome was keeping living things alive. The Kreth consumed doctrine. They had no mechanism for consuming someone who threw out the plan mid-execution. That was the thing. That was what the Council had spent 11 years trying to smooth out of us. I sat with the evacuation data for a while. Outside the window, Geneva was going about its morning, the lake, the light, the mountains deciding whether to be visible today. A city that had been the home of human diplomatic ambition for over a century, the place where treaties were made and agreements were written, and people sat across tables from each other and tried to find language for the things they needed. We were good at that. We were also good at rerouting corridors when we found people where the map said there should not be any. Both things were true. Both things were ours. The Velhari Archspeaker held his first post-agreement session review at 10 in the morning Council Standard. I was not in that session. I received Owen's summary an hour later. Item 14 on the agenda: Routine Infrastructure Proposal from the Surath Confederation, requesting survey assistance for agricultural development in Surath 12. Saraval voted yes. No statement, no commentary. He voted yes and moved to item 15. I read that line in Owen's summary 3 times. Not because I was surprised. I had known, after the last conversation in the chamber, that Saraval was a man capable of recalculation. I had known it and I had respected it, and I had not expected it to land the way it did, a small, quiet yes on a routine infrastructure proposal, so unremarkable it appeared 14th on an agenda. That was the thing about recalculation. It looked like nothing. It was quiet. It was also the most significant vote he had cast in 4 months. I filed Owen's summary, and I did not say anything about item 14 to anyone, because some things were too precise to put into language, and this was one of them. 3 weeks after the ceremony, Myra sent a message. Not through the Council communication system. She had figured out the direct channel, the one that bypassed the routing buffer, the same way she had sent her first message in her own language, trusting us to understand. She wrote in English this time. Her English was careful and very precise, the kind that came from learning a language as an adult, each word placed deliberately, chosen because it was the right one, not because it was the easy one. She said, "I have been practicing bless your heart. I used it in a trade negotiation with the Tarath delegation today. I think I used it correctly. The lead negotiator went very quiet and then changed his position on 3 clauses. Is this correct usage? I read it at my desk in the morning with good coffee. Owen had found a source that actually worked, and I felt something move in my chest that I did not try to name. I wrote back, "That is perfect usage. You are a natural, do not let them figure out what it means." She replied in 4 minutes. Too late, I told them. I looked at my desk, I looked at the window, I looked at the message for a long time. Then I wrote, "Why?" She said, "Because I wanted them to understand that I see them clearly and am choosing grace instead of the other thing. I thought making it explicit was stronger than making it subtle. Was I wrong?" I sat with that. For a long time, I sat with that. The subtle version was the armor that said, "I know, and you know I know, and we are maintaining the surface together." It was the version I had used for 11 years, in a chamber with a quarter-mile ceiling, with an earpiece in my ear and patience like a held breath. The explicit version said, "I see you. I choose this anyway, not because I have to, because I want to." Both were true, both were real, they were not the same thing. "No," I wrote back, "you were not wrong, you found a version I had not thought of." Myra's response took longer this time, 12 minutes. I imagined her at her desk, wherever that desk was now, in whatever office the Sureth delegation had been allocated in the council complex, thinking carefully about her words. She wrote, "I have spent a very long time learning to be small in rooms that did not build seats for us. I think I am still learning how to be the right size." I did not respond immediately. I thought about the chair that was the wrong shade of blue. I thought about 11 grams. I thought about O and his sandwich, and 3 species evacuated clean, and a man who rerouted a corridor because the map was wrong. I wrote, "So are we. You are in good company." That evening, Alan came by the office. He did not have a reason, which meant he had a reason he was not leading with. He sat down across from me and accepted the coffee Owen left on the way out and looked at the Geneva skyline in the particular way that people looked at skylines when they were about to say something they had been thinking about for a while. "The Kreth front is holding," he said. "I know. It is not a victory." "No." He drank his coffee. 3 species out, that is real. "Yes." O says he thinks the front will hold another 6 months if the evacuation corridors stay clear. After that, it depends on whether the Kreth shift their pattern. "What are the odds they shift?" Alan looked at me. He said approximately 0, because they would have to learn to be unpredictable to surprise us, and that is not how they work. I thought about that. "He ate the sandwich before answering Saraval," I said. "I know, I suggested it." You do realize that the sandwich was, strategically, as significant as anything in the 14 pages of terms. Alan almost smiled in his complete and particular way. The sandwich said, "I am exactly what I am, in exactly the way I am it, and you can work with that or not." The terms said the same thing with more documentation. "Yes," I said. 11 years, he said. 11 years. He finished his coffee. He looked at the skyline. He set the cup down with the careful precision of a man who was about to say the thing he had come to say. "Was it worth it?" he said. I thought about 41 entries on a list. 53. The Sureth elder in the observer gallery breathing out. Item 14 on an agenda, a quiet yes. Myra using a phrase as a declaration instead of armor. 3 species on the right side of a tide. The Eth, who had been invisible in 60-year-old records, now alive and somewhere safe. The wrong shade of blue. 11 grams. A different kind of tired. "Ask me again in 11 years, I said. Alan almost smiled. "Fair enough," he said. He left. I sat at my desk and watched the light go out of the Geneva sky, the mountains fading into dark in the way they did when the day was done and the clouds came back, and the city settled into its own quiet. I put in my earpiece. Not because there was a transmission coming, not because I needed it. It was the end of the day and there was nothing left to hear. I put it in because I wanted to, because it was mine and the choice was mine, and that was the whole difference. 11 grams. Not heavy at all, if you were the one deciding to carry it. I turned off the light and went home,